the cold streets and empty stomach. The night was cold, darker than usual, and the broken city around her felt like a graveyard of forgotten dreams. Tall towers that once touched the stars now stood like burned skeletons, their glass windows shattered, their lights long gone. Only the faint glow of old neon signs flickered like dying embers, casting a pale light on the wet streets below. She walked alone, her thin cloak dragging behind her, her stomach twisting in pain. She had not eaten a real meal in days, maybe weeks. The alien widow had lost count of time. Hunger made her weak, and grief made her heavy. Every step felt like a fight, but she forced herself to move. Because if she stopped, if she gave in, then she would be no different from the shadows lying dead in the gutters. Her world had been full of life once. She remembered the smell of food cooking, the sound of children laughing, the warmth of her husband's arms. But war had taken it all. War had taken him too, and left her with nothing but empty nights and endless hunger. She whispered his name sometimes, as if the cold wind might carry her voice into the stars where he slept. But the stars never answered. Rain began to fall. Not soft, gentle rain, but heavy, dirty drops that carried dust and ash. The streets turned slick and she pulled her cloak tighter. But it did little. Her body shivered, her lips cracked, her bones ached. She lowered her eyes to the trash scattered along the road. Maybe she could find something, a crumb, a peel, anything that could trick her stomach for a few more hours. Her hands trembled as she searched a metal bin. The stench made her gag, but hunger was stronger than shame. She pushed broken metal aside, bits of plastic, and then half-rotten food. She lifted it quickly, but her body betrayed her. Her weak hands dropped it back into the filth. She fell to her knees, chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. The city did not care. No one cared. She was invisible now. Just another starving widow in a galaxy that had moved on. Her people had been proud once. Now they were nothing, scattered and forgotten. Some humans had offered mercy, but most only looked with suspicion. Humans and her kind had once been enemies. And though the war had ended, the memories had not. To most, she was a burden. A reminder of blood spilled, as she knelt there, broken. She heard something strange. Small footsteps, light and soft. Out of place in this ruined street, her head turned slowly, expecting a thief or maybe a cruel child ready to throw stones at her. But what she saw froze her breath. A little human girl stood in the doorway of a crumbling building, rain dripping from her hair. Her small hands held something wrapped in old cloth. Her eyes, wide and bright, looked not with fear, not with hate, but with something else. Something the widow had not seen in a long, long time. Kindness. The widow's heart pounded, her mind raced. What was this human child doing here? Why was she staring? And what was she holding? Was it food? Was it a trick? The girl took a step forward, her boots splashing in the puddles, her gaze steady. The cloth in her hands trembled slightly as if the weight inside was heavy for her small arms. The widow shifted back, pressing against the wall, her breath shallow, her heart screaming in warning. She had been fooled before. Humans had mocked her people. Some had even used kindness as bait. She would not be tricked again. But then the child spoke, her voice soft, almost swallowed by the sound of rain. Yet every word cut through the night like a blade. "You look hungry," the girl said. "Please take this." The widow blinked. Stunned, she could not move. She could not even breathe. She watched as the girl unwrapped the cloth, revealing warm bread, steam rising in the cold air. The smell hit her like lightning. Her stomach roared in agony. Her mouth watered. Her hands shook uncontrollably. No, she thought, it cannot be real. No one gives bread to the enemy. No one helps the broken. Her body wanted to crawl forward, to seize it, to devour it, but her pride, her pain, her fear kept her still. She shook her head, whispering in a broken voice, "Why? Why would you give this to me? I am nothing." The child only smiled, her small face glowing with innocence, her eyes shining with a light that pierced the widow's despair. "Because my dad says no one should be hungry," she said, "and because I don't want you to be alone." The widow's heart cracked. She felt tears rise unbidden. Her chest ached. Her dead husband's face flashed before her eyes, and she wondered if fate was mocking her or giving her a second chance. Her trembling hand reached out just an inch, then froze. Doubt clashed with hope inside her. Was this the moment she would break forever, or the moment something new would begin? And so, in the cold streets under the falling rain, a starving alien widow and a small human girl faced each other. Bread between them, silence around them, and the weight of two worlds pressing down. The widow had lived so long in despair, but tonight, something different stirred in her heart. Fear mixed with hope, pain mixed with warmth, hunger mixed with the possibility of mercy. And for the first time in years, she wondered, could kindness still exist, even for someone like her? The gift of bread. The widow sat frozen in the rain, her hollow eyes locked on the bread the child offered, steam still rising from it, a warmth that seemed almost unreal in this cold, merciless city. Her body screamed for it, her stomach twisted with a pain so sharp it felt like knives inside her, yet her pride and her scars held her back. She had been mocked before, fed scraps as a joke by those who laughed at her suffering, thrown crumbs only to have them kicked away when she bent down to pick them up. Her mind whispered that this was no different, that kindness was a trick, that no human child would ever see her as anything but a broken, alien widow. Yet the girl stood there, her small hands steady, her bright eyes filled not with cruelty but with something far more dangerous, innocent trust. The widow's hands trembled as she raised them, slowly, like a soldier surrendering in a war she could never win. Her fingers were thin, her skin stretched tight over bone, her claws dulled from hunger. She hesitated inches away from the bread, her breath uneven, her heart thundering in her chest. And then, finally, the little girl stepped closer and placed the warm loaf directly into her hands. The heat spread across her palms, and for a moment she almost dropped it because the warmth was so alien, so unfamiliar that it frightened her more than the cold. The smell filled her senses, the rich scent of baked grain so powerful that tears burst unbidden from her eyes. Her lips trembled as she whispered almost to herself, "Why are you doing this for me?" The child tilted her head as if confused by the question, then gave a simple answer, one that pierced deeper than any weapon could. "Because you're hungry, and my dad says hunger makes people sad and weak, and I don't want you to be sad anymore." The words were spoken with such honesty that the widow's defenses cracked. She wanted to fight them, to call them lies, to reject them so she would not hope again. But the fire inside her stomach and the fire inside her soul both demanded that she believe, if only for this moment. Slowly, she lifted the bread to her mouth, her teeth sinking into the soft crust. The taste hit her like a memory from another lifetime, warm and gentle, filling her mouth with sweetness and salt, her throat tightening as she swallowed. It was not just food, it was life, and for a brief second, she almost felt human again. The girl clapped her small hands together, smiling as if she had just won a great battle, and said cheerfully, "See, you like it. I knew you would. My dad bakes sometimes when he can. He says bread is the best thing to share because it makes people feel at home." The widow froze at that word. Home. It was a word that cut her deeper than hunger because it was something she had lost forever. Her home had burned, her people scattered, her husband buried under rubble she could never dig through. Yet here stood a little human child speaking of home as if it could be given as easily as bread. She felt a lump rise in her throat, her eyes wet with tears, but she swallowed them down with another bite, not wanting to show how weak she truly was. Still, questions haunted her mind. Why was this child here, alone in the ruins with food in her hands? Where was her father, this mysterious figure who taught her to give to strangers? Was he waiting in the shadows, watching to see if she would steal, or worse, attack his daughter? Fear gnawed at her even as the bread filled her body with fragile strength. She kept glancing around the broken street, expecting to see a man step out from the dark, expecting punishment. Yet no one came. Only the child remained, smiling, as if she had done something perfectly normal by feeding a starving alien widow in the middle of a dying world. The widow wanted to speak, to ask the girl why she trusted her, but her voice refused to rise. She was afraid that if she spoke, the spell would break, and the bread would vanish, and the girl's smile would turn into the cruel laughter she had heard too many times before. So she ate in silence, each bite a battle between shame and survival. The bread was not much, but to her it felt like a feast, and as she finished the last crumbs she realized her hands were shaking less, her breathing steadier, her eyes clearer. When she looked at the girl again, she saw not just a child, but something she could not name. A light, a warmth, maybe even hope. It frightened her more than hunger ever had, because hope was dangerous. Hope was what broke hearts when it was taken away. She had sworn never to hope again after losing everything, and yet here it was, creeping back into her chest through the simple kindness of a child. The widow closed her eyes for a moment, whispering to herself that this was just survival, just food, nothing more, but in her heart she knew it was already more. It was a beginning, though she could not yet see where it would lead. The girl suddenly tugged at her cloak, her small fingers gripping the worn fabric. "Don't be afraid," she said softly. "You're safe here. My dad will want to meet you soon. He helps everyone." The widow's eyes snapped open, her chest tightening with dread. Meet her father? A human man who helped everyone? No, that was impossible. Humans feared her kind, hated her kind, and even if he was kind to others, why would he ever accept her? But the child spoke with such certainty that the widow could not argue. She looked down at the girl, her lips parting to protest, but no words came. For the first time in years, she had no answer, no escape. The rain fell harder, thunder rolling in the distance, the ruined city trembling under the weight of the storm. Yet, in that broken street, beneath the cracked neon lights and shattered towers, something fragile had begun to grow between them. The widow did not know if it was kindness, trust, or something else, but she felt it burning faintly inside her, and it scared her more than hunger ever could. For she realized that this little girl was not just giving her bread, she was giving her a reason to live again. The father's shadow. The rain had passed by morning, leaving behind streets that glistened with puddles and silence. The alien widow sat huddled against the wall of the broken building, her cloak damp and heavy, her body still trembling from hunger even though the bread had given her strength. She thought the girl would not return, that perhaps the kindness of the night before was only a dream her starving mind had created, a cruel trick of hope to torment her further. Yet, as the sky grew pale, she heard the soft sound of footsteps again, light and cheerful, skipping across the wet stones as if the city was not a graveyard, but a playground. Her hollow eyes lifted, and there she was, the same human child, carrying another bundle in her hands, smiling as if nothing in this ruined world could harm her. The widow's heart beat faster, not from joy but from fear. Why was the child coming back to her? Why was she not afraid? Humans did not trust her kind. They did not give gifts freely. They certainly did not risk their children near widows of a fallen enemy race. The questions burned inside her, sharper than hunger, heavier than grief. Each day the girl came, bringing food, bringing words, bringing light into her darkness. And each day the widow found herself more unsettled, not because of cruelty, but because of kindness. Kindness was harder to face than cruelty. Cruelty she understood. Kindness she could not explain. The girl spoke of her father often. She told stories with a bright voice as if every word was a treasure. "My dad fixes broken things," she would say proudly, her eyes glowing as though she was describing a hero. "He fixes machines, he fixes homes, he fixes hearts." The widow would listen in silence, trying not to let the words sink into her, but they always did. The more the girl spoke, the more the widow felt a shadow forming, a presence she could not yet see but could already feel. The father, the man behind these stories, the man who taught his daughter to share bread with strangers, the man who might one day step into the street and see her sitting there, a starving alien widow feeding on his kindness through his child. The thought filled her with dread. She imagined him tall, harsh, with the voice of authority, a man who would drag his daughter away and spit at her feet for daring to touch a creature like her. Perhaps he would call guards, or worse, use his own hands to drive her out. Humans had been merciless in the past. Why would this man be any different? And yet the girl's eyes carried no fear when she spoke his name. She trusted him with her whole heart, the way the widow had once trusted her husband before the war stole him. That kind of trust was dangerous because it could break everything. Still, she listened. She listened as the child described how he worked late into the night, how his hands were scarred but steady, how he always found a way to turn nothing into something. The widow tried to hide the small flicker inside her chest when she heard these things, but she could not stop it completely. Against her will, she wondered about this man. She wondered what kind of father raised a child who would walk into the ruins and offer bread to the enemy. She wondered what kind of man could inspire such pure faith. One evening, as the child left, the widow followed her with her eyes until she disappeared into the broken street. For the first time, she felt the urge to rise and follow, to see where the girl lived, to glimpse the man who lived in her stories. But fear kept her frozen. She could not face him. She could not risk destroying the fragile thread of survival the girl had given her. If the father rejected her, if he ended it all, she would fall deeper than she had ever fallen before, and this time, she knew she would not rise again. Days passed like this, each one weaving the shadow of the father closer into her life. The widow grew restless, her mind torn between hope and terror. She dreamed of him sometimes, faceless and silent, watching her from a distance. In her dreams, sometimes he reached out a hand, and sometimes he turned his back and walked away. She would wake with her chest aching, her heart pounding as if she had lived another lifetime in her sleep. The girl's visits became a lifeline. With each meal, the widow's body grew stronger, her voice steadier, her spirit less broken. But her fear also grew, because with each day she felt more like she belonged, and belonging was dangerous. Belonging meant she could be cast out again, and the more she belonged, the more it would hurt when it ended. Then, one evening, as the child handed her another piece of bread, she smiled and said something that froze the widow in place. "One day soon, you will meet my dad," she said with innocence so pure it felt like a knife. "He wants to see you. He always says we should not hide kindness from each other." The widow's breath caught, her hands stiff, the bread almost slipping from her grip. She stared at the girl, her mind spiraling. Meet her father? She could not. She dared not. The shadow she had feared was now no longer a shadow. It was real, and it was coming. She whispered a broken sound, almost a plea. "No, no, I cannot." But the girl only shook her head gently, her smile unwavering. "Don't be afraid. My dad is good. You will see." And then she left, skipping into the night as if she had not just thrown the widow's world into chaos. The widow sat in silence long after the child was gone, the bread heavy in her hands, her heart heavier still. The father was no longer a distant story. He was coming, and the widow did not know whether he would bring salvation or destruction. All she knew was that the shadow of the father now hung over her life, and soon she would have to face it. The unexpected. Question: the nights grew longer and colder, yet the child kept returning, her steps light, her hands carrying little bundles of food, her voice filling the empty air with warmth the widow had thought forever lost. Slowly, the alien widow's body began to recover, her sunken eyes gaining a faint glow, her trembling hands finding strength again. Still, the fear in her heart never left. Every time the girl mentioned her father, the widow felt the same sharp weight press down on her chest. She told herself she should run. She should leave before the shadow of that man finally appeared. But each time she thought of leaving, she remembered the child's smile, the way her small fingers tugged at her cloak, the way her laughter broke through the silence of the ruins. And so the widow stayed, trapped not by chains, but by something far more powerful, hope she did not want to admit. It was on a night when the wind howled like a wounded beast and the ruined city groaned under the storm that the moment came. The widow had built a small fire in the hollow of a wall, its weak glow fighting against the darkness. She sat close to it, clutching her cloak, staring at the flames as memories of her husband drifted like ghosts around her. She had whispered his name again, as she always did, when she heard the small footsteps approach. The girl appeared out of the rain, soaked but smiling, her arms full of a cloth bundle that smelled faintly of soup. She sat beside the widow without fear, without hesitation, as if this broken street was the safest place in the galaxy. They ate together in silence, the widow sipping slowly from the tin cup, each warm swallow reminding her that she was still alive. The child, as always, chattered about small things, about the way the rain had turned the street into a river, about a bird she had seen perched on a broken lamp, about how her father had fixed a machine that everyone thought was beyond repair. The widow listened, half afraid, half comforted, knowing each word brought the shadow of the father closer. Then the girl grew quiet, unusually quiet, her small eyes studying the widow as if she was gathering courage. The widow frowned, her heart beginning to pound. She had learned that when silence came, it carried weight. The girl placed her tiny hands on her knees, leaned closer, and in a voice that was soft, yet unshakable, she asked, "Why don't you marry my dad?" The words struck like lightning. The widow froze, her body stiff, her breath caught in her throat. She stared at the girl in disbelief, certain she had misheard. But the child's innocent eyes were steady, her face open, her voice filled with simple certainty as she continued. "If you marry my dad, you will never be hungry again. He is lonely, and you are lonely. You can be family." The widow's cup slipped from her fingers, spilling onto the wet ground. Her chest heaved, her mind spinning wildly. She could not breathe, could not think. Marry? Family? Did the child not understand what she was? She was an alien widow, scarred by war, rejected by society, a burden to anyone who dared come close. She had nothing to give, nothing to share, nothing but sorrow and memories of death. She wanted to laugh, to scream, to weep all at once. She whispered hoarsely, "No, no, child, you do not understand. I am not worthy. I cannot." But the girl shook her head, cutting her off, her small voice stronger than thunder. "You are worthy. You are kind. My dad says worth is not about what you have. It's about what you give. And you have already given me something no one else has. You listen to me. You sit with me. You don't tell me to go away. That is enough." The widow's eyes burned with tears she could not control. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to hide the flood of emotions breaking through the walls she had built around her heart. For years she had lived as nothing, as forgotten, as less than the shadows. And now, this child, this small human with soft hands and wide eyes, spoke of marriage, of family, of belonging. The cruelty of it almost broke her. Was it a cruel joke of fate to place such words in her ears when she had sworn never to hope again? Her husband's face appeared in her memory, his smile, his touch, the sound of his voice telling her she was strong, that she could survive. And then she thought of the child's father, the man she had never met, the man who had raised this girl to carry such light in her soul. Was he anything like the stories? Was he truly a man who fixed what was broken? Could he fix someone as shattered as her? The silence between them stretched long, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant growl of thunder. The widow finally lowered her hands, her eyes red, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Child, your heart is pure, but you ask for what cannot be. Humans and my kind, we were enemies. The galaxy would never accept such a union." The girl only shrugged as if the galaxy meant nothing. "The galaxy doesn't have to accept it," she said simply. "Only my dad does. And I know he will, because he always says the galaxy is too big to listen to, but people are small enough to love." The widow's heart pounded, her body trembling with fear and longing. She wanted to reject it, to tell the girl to stop speaking such dangerous words, but she could not. She sat there, paralyzed, caught between despair and the fragile spark of hope the child had placed in her. The unexpected question had cracked open a door inside her, a door she thought had been locked forever. And now she could not unhear the words, could not undo the idea. As the fire burned low and the storm raged outside, the widow sat with the child's question echoing endlessly in her mind. Could she ever be more than what she was? Could she ever belong again? Or was this only another cruel dream, one that would shatter her completely when reality came? One thing was certain. The girl's words had changed everything. The widow would never look at the child the same way again, and she would never look at the shadow of the father without trembling. For now she knew that the shadow was not just a threat, it was a possibility too dangerous to dream of and too powerful to ignore. The father appears the night after the girl's impossible question felt endless. The widow did not sleep, she could not. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the child's innocent face, heard her words echoing in her ears. "Why don't you marry my dad?" It was a suggestion so outrageous, so unthinkable, that it should have been laughed away, forgotten as quickly as it was spoken. Yet the words clung to her like a shadow, pressing against her heart with a weight she could not throw off. She sat awake by the cold ashes of her fire, staring at the darkness, her stomach twisting not from hunger this time, but from fear of what might come. The shadow of the father no longer lingered on the edges of her imagination. Now it loomed directly over her, closer than ever before. When morning came, she almost fled the ruined street. Her instincts screamed at her to disappear before the child returned with the man who could shatter this fragile peace. She rose to her feet, her cloak heavy, her eyes darting toward the distant alleys that led away from this place. Yet her legs refused to move. For all her fear, she could not leave. Something stronger than terror held her there, a bond she had not wanted but could no longer deny. The child had given her more than food. She had given her company, kindness, and a voice in the silence. To run now would mean tearing herself away from the only warmth she had felt since the war stole her husband. The hours dragged until, at last, she heard the familiar footsteps. But this time they were not light and alone. They were heavier, steady, strong. Her heart seized, her throat tightened, and her hands clutched her cloak as if the fabric could shield her from what was coming. The girl appeared first, smiling as always, but behind her a tall figure stepped from the mist of the ruined street. The widow's breath caught. The father had come. He was not what she expected. His frame was broad, his shoulders heavy with years of labor, his clothes worn but clean. Scars marked his arms and face, not the sharp marks of cruelty but the deep lines of survival, the kind that told stories of battles fought and endured. His eyes were not hard as she feared, but tired, the kind of tired that comes from carrying too much for too long. Yet behind the weariness there was strength, a strength that did not come from weapons or rank, but from will. He stopped when he saw her, his gaze settling on the alien widow who stood frozen in the shadow of a broken wall. The child, oblivious to the storm building inside the widow, ran forward happily and tugged her father's hand. "This is her," she said brightly, her voice filled with pride. "This is the one I told you about, the one who listens to me, the one who was hungry. See, I told you she's kind." The widow wanted to disappear into the stone. She expected the man to frown, to pull his daughter away, to spit words of warning or disgust. But he did not. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he did something she could never have imagined. He set down the bundle he carried and placed it on the ground between them. It was a bag of food. Not scraps, not pity, but real food. He spoke then, his voice low and steady, carrying none of the venom she expected. "If my daughter trusts you," he said simply, "then I will not question it." The widow's knees almost gave out. She stared at him in disbelief, unable to comprehend what she had just heard. No anger, no rejection, no judgment, only acceptance, given so easily it felt unreal. She had braced herself for cruelty, for the pain she had known all her life, but instead she found herself facing a man who trusted his daughter's heart more than his own fear. It was too much to believe. Her lips trembled, and she could only whisper, "Why? Why would you not turn me away?" The man shrugged slightly, as if the answer required no thought. "Because no one should be hungry. Because my daughter is right more often than she is wrong. And because I know what it means to lose too much." His eyes softened for a moment, the weight of memory flashing through them. She recognized that look. It was the look of someone who had carried loss, just as she had. The girl beamed between them, unaware of the storm of emotions rising in the widow's chest. She hugged her father's arm and declared proudly, See, I told you he would help. He helps everyone. He fixes broken things. He can fix her too." The widow's breath hitched at those words. She wanted to protest, to shout that she was beyond fixing, that she was nothing but pieces that could never be made whole. Yet the way the man looked at her silenced those thoughts. He did not see an enemy. He did not see a burden. He saw only a woman in need, and he did not turn away. For the first time in years, she felt warmth that was not from fire or food, but from trust. A dangerous warmth, one that threatened to melt the armor she had built around her heart. She tried to harden herself, to remind herself that this could not last, that the galaxy would never allow such kindness to remain. Yet, as she stood in the ruined street with the child holding her father's hand and the man offering her food without hesitation, the walls inside her began to crack. That night, as they left her with more than enough to eat, she sat alone by the fire, staring at the bag of food in disbelief. Her hands shook as she touched it, her eyes burning with tears she had not let fall in years. She whispered into the darkness, her voice breaking, "Why are they doing this? Why now, when I had already accepted the end?" The silence gave no answer, but inside her something new had taken root, fragile yet unyielding. The Father had appeared, and with him came not the end she feared, but the beginning of something she dared not name. Testing. Trust. The days that followed the Father's arrival felt different, heavier, and yet strangely brighter. The alien widow no longer sat in the ruins alone, waiting only for death. Now, every morning, she found herself looking down the cracked street, waiting for the sound of small footsteps and the shadow of the man who carried food without hesitation. The little girl came every day, sometimes with her father, sometimes without, but the presence of both was now stitched into her life like threads she had not asked for, yet could not cut away. With each passing day, she felt her strength return, her body no longer weak and trembling, her mind no longer only consumed by hunger. But with that strength came a new fear, a deeper fear than even starvation, because she had begun to care again. Caring was dangerous. Caring meant she could lose. She had lived too long in the ashes of war to forget that anything gained could be taken away. Every kindness felt like a trap. Every moment of warmth felt like the calm before a storm. And yet, when the girl tugged her cloak and asked her to sit closer by the fire, she obeyed. When the Father placed food before her and said nothing of her scars or her alien features, only that she should eat more, she obeyed. She wanted to resist, to build her walls higher, but they kept breaking, piece by piece, with every act of quiet mercy. Still, she told herself that trust was a fragile dream. She remembered the faces of humans who had once jeered at her kind, who had called them unworthy, who had seen them as enemies even after the war ended. The world outside the ruins still carried those voices. She could hear them in her memory, and sometimes even in whispers when she walked the streets. It was not safe to trust. It would never be safe. Yet the girl's words haunted her. "My dad fixes broken things. He can fix you too." The widow hated that she wanted to believe it. Her doubts were tested sooner than she expected. One night, as the three of them sat near the fire, the silence of the city was shattered by shouts and heavy boots echoing through the streets. Raiders. Bands of desperate men who scavenged the ruins for whatever they could steal, often taking more than just food. The widow froze, her body stiff with instinctive fear. She had faced raiders before, and she knew what they could do. Her eyes darted to the Father, who stood quickly, his body tense, his hand already reaching for a long metal rod he carried for protection. The little girl clung to his arm, her wide eyes filled not with fear, but with trust, as if she believed he could face the entire galaxy if needed. The widow's heart pounded as the voices grew closer, harsh and cruel, the sound of laughter mixed with threats. She felt the old instinct rise inside her, the instinct to run, to disappear into the shadows before the danger could find her. She had always survived by fleeing, by abandoning whatever small light she had found because survival demanded it. Her legs twitched, ready to move to vanish into the alleys. But when her eyes fell on the little girl clinging to her father's side, something inside her shifted. The child was not running. The man was not running. They were standing together, ready to face what came. And if she ran now, if she left them, then everything the girl had given her, bread, kindness, hope, would turn to ash. The raiders appeared at the end of the street, their shapes dark against the faint glow of ruined lamps. They laughed when they saw the fire, when they saw the child, when they saw the widow. "Look at this," one of them sneered, "a traitor alien widow feeding on human scraps, and a fool man protecting her." The widow's body stiffened at the words, shame and fury burning together in her chest. The father stepped forward, his rod raised, his voice calm but firm. "Leave," he said simply. "There is nothing here for you." The raiders jeered, stepping closer, circling like predators. One of them pointed at the widow. "Nothing? I see plenty. The alien can be sold. The child can be taken, and you can be left in the dirt." The widow's blood ran cold. She knew this cruelty. She had lived it before. Her mind screamed at her to run, to survive, to leave them behind. But her body would not move. Instead, she felt a different fire ignite inside her. The little girl's hand reached for her cloak, holding on tightly, and in that small grip, she found her answer. She could not leave. Not this time. The raiders lunged, and in that instant the widow rose. Her body, weak for so long, moved with a strength born of desperation. She leapt forward, her claws flashing, her voice a raw snarl that echoed through the street. She struck one raider across the face, sending him sprawling into the dirt. The others recoiled in shock, not expecting the broken widow to fight. The father moved beside her, his rod swinging with brutal precision, striking another to the ground. Together, human and alien stood shoulder to shoulder, protecting the child who cried out but did not let go of their hands. The fight was brutal but brief. The raiders, surprised by the resistance, retreated with curses and threats, vanishing back into the dark from which they had come. The street grew silent once more, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the heavy breathing of those who remained. The widow collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving, her body shaking with exhaustion and fear. She had fought not for herself, but for them. For the first time in years, she had chosen not survival alone, but protection, loyalty, and trust. The father looked at her, his scarred face calm, his eyes steady. He placed a hand on her shoulder, not in thanks, not in pity, but in recognition. She met his gaze, and in that moment no words were needed. She had passed the test, though no one had spoken of it. Trust was no longer a dream. It had been forged in the fire of danger, sealed in blood and sweat. The little girl hugged her tightly, whispering, "See, I told you, you're strong. I told you we could be family." The widow trembled, her tears finally breaking free, and for once she did not fight them. She held the child close, her heart breaking and healing all at once. She had trusted. She had fought. And she had not been abandoned. The heart and home. The night after the raid was quiet, but the silence felt different now. It was no longer the hollow silence of despair, but the heavy stillness that follows a storm. The alien widow sat near the dim glow of the fire, her body aching from the fight, her hands trembling not from hunger, but from exhaustion. Across from her, the father tended to a shallow wound on his arm, his movements calm and practiced, as if pain was a familiar companion. The little girl slept between them, her small form wrapped in both their cloaks, her breathing soft and steady. For a long time, neither the widow nor the man spoke. The crackling of the fire and the gentle rhythm of the child's breath were the only sounds that filled the ruins. The widow's mind spun in endless circles. She had fought beside them. She had chosen to stay when running might have saved her. And in that choice, something inside her had changed. The walls she had built to protect herself for years had cracked wide open, and through the cracks poured feelings she had sworn never to feel again. Trust, belonging, hope. She had once promised herself that she would live only to survive, never to dream, never to reach for what could be taken away. But now, as she looked at the man who sat silently across from her and the child who clung to them both, even in her sleep, she wondered if perhaps survival was no longer enough. The man finally broke the silence, his voice low and steady. "You didn't have to fight," he said, his eyes fixed on the flames. "You could have run. Most would have. But you stayed." His gaze lifted to meet hers, and for the first time, she did not look away. His eyes held no suspicion, no anger, only the calm weight of a truth spoken aloud. That means something. The widow swallowed hard, her throat tight. She wanted to answer, to explain that she had stayed not out of strength but out of fear. Fear of losing the little girl's light, fear of losing the fragile bond that had begun to grow between them. But the words would not come. Instead, she whispered, "I could not leave her. She gave me life when I had none left. I could not abandon her, even if it meant death." The man nodded once as though he had expected nothing less. His hand brushed the child's hair gently, a father's touch filled with quiet love. "She has that effect," he murmured almost to himself. "She gives her heart too easily. But maybe the galaxy needs more of that." The widow stared at him, her heart heavy. This was the man the child spoke of, the man who fixed what was broken, who carried his scars not as shame but as proof of survival. She had feared him for so long, had imagined him as a judge, an executioner, the one who would end the fragile hope she clung to. But now she saw him as he was, a man who had endured, who had chosen kindness despite a world that offered little of it. And for the first time, she allowed herself to think the unthinkable. Perhaps the child was right. Perhaps she could belong here. Days turned into weeks. The widow no longer waited in the ruins alone. She was welcomed into the small home the man had built, a home patched together from scraps and broken walls but filled with warmth. She ate meals at their table, sat by their fire, listened to the girls' endless stories, and even found herself laughing at moments when she thought laughter had long since died inside her. The neighbors whispered, some with suspicion, some with scorn. But the man never faltered, and the girl never wavered. Slowly, the widow began to believe that the galaxy's judgment mattered less than the small circle of light she had found here. But doubt never vanished entirely. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ruins and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the widow sat outside the house, her cloak wrapped tightly around her. The child ran in the yard, laughing, while the father worked quietly beside her, repairing a broken chair. She watched them, her chest aching with a mix of fear and longing. She whispered to herself, "I do not deserve this." The man looked up, hearing her though her voice was soft. He studied her for a long moment, then said simply, "Deserve has nothing to do with it. Life doesn't give what we deserve. It gives what we fight for, what we choose. You chose to stay. You chose to fight for us. That is enough." The words struck her like a hammer breaking the last of her chains. She realized then that she was no longer a starving widow waiting to die in the ruins. She was part of something again, fragile but real. The little girl, sensing the moment, ran to her, wrapping her arms around her waist and looking up with innocent certainty. "See," she said, "I told you. We are family now." Tears filled the widow's eyes as she bent to hold the child, her arms trembling as if they carried the weight of a galaxy. She looked over the girl's head at the father, who met her gaze with quiet strength. He gave no grand promises, no declarations, only the simple truth of his presence, steady and unyielding. And in that moment, she understood that this was enough. The galaxy would never understand. The galaxy might even condemn them. But here, in this small circle of warmth carved out of the ruins, despair had been turned into hope, loneliness into belonging, hunger into love. The alien widow, once broken and forgotten, had found not just survival, but a home. And so, the story that began with a starving widow in the cold streets ended with something far greater, not with war or vengeance, but with the simple, unstoppable truth of the human spirit. A truth carried first by a child's innocent heart and sealed by the trust of a man who believed in second chances.